Good morning and welcome. My name is Henry Wessinger and I'm the president of State of Safety Action. Gun violence is a daily tragedy here in Oregon. On average, an Oregonian dies every day from gun violence. State of Safety Action and our sister affiliate, State of Safety, were founded in 2018 to reduce gun violence in Oregon and to increase our state of safety. We believe that gun deaths are preventable deaths. We believe everyone has the right to be safe from gun violence. Oregonians are safer today from gun violence because of two key gun violence prevention laws passed in the past 5 years that require universal background checks and provide for emergency protection orders. But more can and should be done, especially when it comes to protecting our children from gun violence. Bulletproof backpacks are not the answer to protecting our children from gun violence at home and at school. Today, State of Safety Action is pleased to announce we have successfully gathered and we will be submitting after this press conference the required sponsorship signatures for Initiative Petition 40 to require safe storage of firearms in Oregon. IP 40 contains the same elements as House Bill 2505 from the 2019 legislative session. State of Safety Action was proud to support House Bill 2505, and we urge the legislature to act this February to pass this important set of policies, because every day we delay adopting these policies means more Oregon lives being needlessly lost. But regardless of whether safe storage is passed by the legislature next spring or by the voters next November, State of Safety Action is committed to working on behalf of all Oregonians to improve our state of safety. This morning we'll be hearing from 7 individuals behind me. 3 are lawmakers committed to passing safe storage legislation. 2 are family members of gun violence victims whose deaths were the result of irresponsible gun owners' lack of safe storage. And 2 are educators who are on the front lines who can speak to the impact of gun violence in the schools. It's now my honor to introduce Representative Rachel Prusak, who represents the 37th District, which includes West Lynn. Representative Prusak is a nurse practitioner and a committed champion for gun violence prevention. Our partner Political Action Committee, Oregonians for Safe Gun Storage PAC, was proud to support her in her first House election in 2018. During the just completed legislative session, she demonstrated the energy and tenacity of a future House whip. Please join me in welcoming Representative Prusak to the podium.
Thank you, Henry. As a gun violence survivor and advocate for sensible gun reform, it's important for me personally to be here as we together move forward with a gun policy that will make Oregon safer. I ran for my House seat on gun violence prevention platform, and I was proud to chief sponsor House Bill 2505 in the 2019 session. My view is not just informed by my time as a medical professional or as a state legislator, but as someone who has dealt with the reality of gun violence. Having gone through the torment of an abusive and obsessive partner and come out the other side, I know the toll it can take. I am thankful to be here to give voice for those who have experienced this kind of violence and to prevent another person from a traumatic, potentially deadly experience. It was a great disappointment to me that we were not able to take stronger action on gun violence in the past legislative session. But myself and my fellow House Democrats are committed to making sure this will not happen again. The Speaker of the House has committed publicly that safe storage will be a priority for gun legislation in our chamber next year. It is my belief that we will avoid the need for this ballot measure by enacting safe storage during the February 2020 session. We know the public stands with us, and it is past time for our elected leaders to lead when it comes to safe gun storage. Safe gun storage, directly addresses numerous areas of gun violence that frequently impact our communities. For example, unintentional shootings where children gain access to a firearm, school shootings where we know a large majority of firearms come from the family home or the home of a relative, and suicides, where we know how easy access to firearms greatly increases the risk for someone taking their own life. Gun violence rates in Oregon exceed the national average. We can act to change that, and I am glad to be here today as we demand action to make our state safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for those comments and your strong commitment to passing safe storage next year. I now have the honor to introduce Representative Alissa Keny-Guyer, who represents the 46th District in East Portland. Representative Keny-Guyer is another champion of sensible gun laws and also received support in 2018 by our partner PAC, Oregonians for Safe Gun Storage. She's been a fierce advocate for gun violence prevention since she was elected to the House in 2011. She first introduced safe storage legislation in the 2013 session and has been a strong proponent for its adoption in each session since. Representative Keny-Guyer is noted for her willingness to work on the most complex and challenging legislative issues, and I'm very grateful for her continued energy, experience, and support for this effort. Representative Alissa Keny-Guyer.
Thank you, Henry. I was fortunate to be one of the first folks that Henry talked to when he decided to make this his personal passion, and it is truly impressive what he has built over the last year and a half. I've been working to stop gun violence for years. It reflects my commitment to addressing the public health challenges that impact Oregonians, particularly in vulnerable and underserved communities. We first introduced safe storage legislation during the 2013 session after the tragedy in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, as well as at the Clackamas Town Mall, where I lost one of my constituents, Cindy Ewell. Frankly, this legislation should be a no-brainer. It is past time for us to require guns be stored in a way that they don't fall into the hands of those who are a danger to themselves or to others. Gun violence has many causes that contribute to it, but there is always one common denominator: easy access to a gun. We've seen in other nations that when we reduce the means to access a deadly item, it directly reduces the rates of suicide and other types of harm. There is no one solution that will prevent every gun death, but there are a handful of simple solutions that can greatly reduce the problem. That starts with requiring guns be locked up when they are not under the immediate control of their owners. When it comes to gun suicides, for instance, a recent University of Utah study found that if there are barriers between somebody and a loaded weapon, or that weapon is locked up, it's been shown to be associated with significant reductions in suicide deaths. This is particularly relevant in Oregon, where around 85% of gun deaths are suicide, a rate significantly above the national average. Safe gun storage will start saving lives as soon as it is enacted. I will fight hard to ensure we pass this policy in the 2020 legislature, and I am glad that if this legislation is blocked for any reason, this initiative will take it directly to the voters in the next November's election. Let's hope that's not necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Alissa, for your continued dedication to this issue. I now have the honor to introduce Representative Janeen Sollman, who represents the 30th District, which includes Hillsborough and North Plains, as our third lawmaker to speak today. Representative Sollman has been a longtime volunteer and advocate in her community with a special focus on education, working to help every student succeed. Before joining the legislature, she first served as a member and then the chair of the Hillsborough School Board. Her commitment to the welfare of our children is exemplary, and during the past number of weeks, she has actively worked to gather signatures and gain advocates for IP40. Representative Sollman also received support in 2018 from our partner PAC, Oregonians for Safe Gun Storage. Representative Sollman.
Thank you, Henry, for those kind words. Senseless tragedies that our friends, neighbors, and our communities are experiencing on a daily basis due to violence should not be our way of life. As legislators, our job is to represent our communities, to promote the safety and well-being, and to create positive change for them. And when outside forces get in the way and legislators cannot quite get that bill across the finish line, Oregonians step up, like they are doing in this initiative. It is my hope that we can secure passage of this legislation next February and move on to additional steps to protect our communities. but I'm glad that the State of Safety Action and other partners from across the state are holding us accountable to take action. We do not merely want your thoughts, your prayers, and your moments of silence anymore. Americans deserve and demand action. Gun violence is deeply personal and directly impacts too many in our community. In just one case in my community, an 11-year-old boy took his own life because he had access to a gun. No child should be able to access a deadly weapon that can take their own life, whether it's intentionally or accidental. Responsible parents and responsible gun owners must take steps to create and keep laws in place to keep our children safe from guns. And this initiative would make that happen and make that a law. It's a common sense step towards something that needs to happen. I look forward to being a champion of this piece of legislation and doing everything that I can to make sure that it becomes a law in 2020. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today and for the hard work that we are all going to do to make this happen in Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you, Janeen, for your commitment to children and your work to make our community safe from gun violence. My commitment to a second chapter nonprofit career predated my meeting our next speaker, but getting to know Paul Kemp is what cemented my commitment. Paul tragically lost his friend and brother-in-law, Steve Forsythe, in the 2012 Clackamas Town Center shooting. In the aftermath of that loss, Paul has worked tirelessly in a variety of ways to prevent other families from experiencing the pain and grief of senseless gun violence. Paul is a chief sponsor of IP40, a co-founder of Gun Owners for Responsible Ownership, and a board member of State of Safety Action. Please join me in welcoming Paul Kemp to the podium.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you, State of Safety Action, for putting together today's event. 6 years ago, an angry young man spent the night at a friend's house with the intention of using his friend's unsecured, fully loaded firearms, including a Stag 15 assault rifle, to commit a mass shooting. With premeditation, he bought a number of high-capacity magazines and ammunition to fill those magazines in the weeks ahead of the December 11, 2012 shooting. When the owner of the guns woke up on Tuesday, December 11th, he realized that some of his weapons were missing and that his friend had left the apartment. Those unsecured firearms were used to murder my brother-in-law, Steve Forsythe, and Jenna Ewell's mother, Cindy Ewell. Also, don't not forget, the shooter took his own life with one of those loaded unsecured firearms as well. There was also a teenage girl who was shot and fortunately survived her gunshot wound. The owner of those guns had no obligation under Oregon law to report them as missing, and he did not. In fact, the legal gun owner did not call police until the mall shooting was national news. I will never forget the personal pain of telling my nephew that his father had been killed at the mall, nor the phone calls I made to my parents and Steve's brother telling him that Steve had in fact been killed. It is time for Oregon to enact a measure to prevent this type of tragedy in the future. I am a gun owner and have been most of my life. Secure and safe storage was drilled into me as a young man, as a teen. That was the way we did things in our home. And that's the way I've done things, and that's the way I've taught my son. Responsible gun owners already safely secure their weapons when not being carried, and it's time that all gun owners do that. Otherwise, consequences will result when others are injured and killed. Today I'm calling on next year's legislature to finally enact this legislation. It is long past time. But know that if our elected officials fail to act, we stand ready to take this policy direct to the people of Oregon in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for all of your hard work and courageous example. Courageous also applies to our next speaker, Eugene resident Carol Manstrom, who lost her 18-year-old son to gun violence in 2017. On February 13, 2017, Carol's former husband left a loaded handgun unsecured within easy access in his home. The next day, Valentine's Day, Carol's son, William Hahn Manstrom Grinning, a student at Marist High School, was found dead. He had died by suicide using his father's unsecured gun. Carol has been an active supporter over the past 18 months of our work to pass safe storage in Oregon. She's here today with her younger son, Miles. And please join me in welcoming Carol Manstrom to the podium.
Thank you, Henry. I appreciate the chance to be here today, but I wish it was under different circumstances. Just about 2 years ago, I lost my son, Will, to gun violence. It was an indescribably painful experience that no parent or family should ever have to go through. It is my hope that by sharing with you today, we can make sure that other parents and families in Oregon do not suffer these losses like I have. Being a teenager can be tough, and a good parent is there to help their child make it through those tough times. But a good parent also takes steps to protect our children from themselves. We were all young ones, and we know that it's very easy for teens to make an impulsive decision that changes or can change their entire life. In the case of my son, Will, it was a decision that he'll never be able to take back. If a loaded gun was not easily accessible to him that night, I believe he would be with us today. And this is a reality being faced by parents in Oregon today because teen suicide rates continue to rise. We can do something about this. Responsible gun owners must take steps to make sure guns don't end up in the hands of someone who can hurt themselves or others. Safe storage prevents suicides. This is common sense, and it should be the law. I'm a retired law enforcement officer. This is common sense. I carried a gun in my job for most of the years that I was a law enforcement officer. I'm here today to declare my support for Initiative Petition 40 and to call on our legislators to act. No more delays and no more excuses. It's time we did more to protect our families from gun violence, and that starts with safe storage. Thank you very much.
Carol, thank you for your willingness to speak out and share your story today, for your dedication to saving other families from the tragedy you have experienced. Two-thirds of all school shootings involve weapons taken from the home of the attacker or from the home of a relative of the attacker. Common thread in all mass shootings at schools are teacher and adult victims who died using their bodies as shields to protect their students from the shooters. I have 3 nieces who are public school teachers in Oregon, one in Portland, one in Salem, and one in Bend. I absolutely believe that passing safe gun legislation will significantly reduce the probability of future school shootings. Members of Portland Association of Teachers have been consistent champions of safe storage legislation and were instrumental in helping us gather the qualifying signatures through an all-volunteer effort. PAT represents 4,000 educational professionals in the Portland public school system. Our next speaker, Elizabeth Deal, is an English teacher at the Madison High School, a parent, and the Vice President of the Portland Association of Teachers. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Deal.
Thanks, Henry, and thanks to the work of the State of Safety Action in pushing forward this policy in collaboration with organizations like the Portland Association of Teachers. As teachers, we come into this profession because we want to see children thrive, to fully realize their talents, their passions, and their potential. We will do almost anything to help our students succeed. But one thing teachers will never do is accept that gun violence in schools is inevitable. It's part of our current reality that teachers are asked to lead students as young as age 5 through active shooter lockdown drills. And as has tragically happened several times in Oregon during my career as a teacher, we are first responders to active shooters on our school campuses. This is not our vision for the schools that our students deserve. Many of our students depend on their school to be their safe haven. They should not have to associate the word school with the word shooter. Oregon can do better for our children. We know from research that most of the time, when a person brings a gun to campus, they got it from their home or from the home of a relative. Safe storage is an effective deterrent that makes it much harder for an individual in crisis to get their hands on a firearm. It is basic common sense policy, and it's time it were the law of our state. Teachers are tired of excuses and are ready to do the work to get this law passed. Our students are depending on us, the adults, to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for taking time from your teaching to be with us today. And thank you and all your members for all that you do for our children. Our final speaker is part of the oldest and largest network of parents in Oregon with over 14,000 members statewide. Oregon PTA has been working with and supporting our work to pass safe storage from our beginning, and we truly appreciate their commitment and perspective. Too often, Oregon parents are directly impacted by gun violence by way of youth suicides, school shootings, and accidental shootings. I'm very pleased to introduce today's final speaker, Oregon PTA President Christy Dill.
Thank you, Henry. This month, Oregon parents and teachers are immersed in back-to-school activities, planning for the year and how we can support our students. Unfortunately, gun violence is too often part of that conversation. We need to consider when looking out for our children. Dramatic school shootings remind us that nowhere in our community is safe from gun violence. Every child must go through the experience of a lockdown drill, thinking about where they're going to hide in their classroom, or how they would attempt to fight a person who's armed with a firearm. We as a society should be embarrassed that we put our children through this experience. Our children are also impacted by other gun violence. Parents must ask now if weapons are safely stored before a play date, before they go to a relative's house. Youth suicides in particular have risen in Oregon since 2010. We are far beyond the national average, and firearms are employed in a majority of these suicides. No parent should lose a child to gun violence, particularly when we can take the steps to protect young people. Oregon PT stands ready to make our community safer from gun violence. It is the duty none of us can ignore in this age, and we urge our leaders to do their part. Thank you, State of Safety Action, for leading this work to qualify the ballot measure and ensure safe storage of all firearms happens in Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy, for your work, and thanks to Oregon PTA for being such a great partner in this effort. And thanks again to all of today's speakers and the other people here today. Working together, I truly believe Oregon will pass safe gun storage in 2020. In a moment, we'll take a few questions before we head across the street to drop off these signatures with the Secretary of State. But I'd like to leave you with 3 final thoughts. First, protecting our children and grandchildren from gun violence is not a partisan issue and should never be framed as one. Republicans, Democrats, and independents all love their children and grandchildren equally deeply. Second, from polling work done last year by our sister affiliate State of Safety, 75% of Oregon gun owners already practice safe gun storage. This work is about getting the other 25% to do the same. Third, I want to read a passage on safe storage from the website, surprisingly enough, of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, the Firearm Industry's National Trade Association. Quote, "As a firearm owner, it is your responsibility to ensure that guns in your home are stored where they are inaccessible to children or other unauthorized people. Hiding a gun in a closet, drawer, or similar location is not safe storage. Safe storage is employing precautions and multiple safeguards that provide an additional barrier against unauthorized use. Unloaded firearms should be stored in a locked cabinet, safe, gun vault, or storable case. The storage location should be inaccessible to children. Gun locking devices render firearms inoperable and can be used in addition to locked storage. Ideally, cable-style locks should be used in addition to primary storage system like a gun safe or vault." Close quote. I don't think I could have said it any better myself. We call on our elected leaders and every resident of Oregon to join this effort to prevent gun violence and create a state of safety for all Oregonians. Thank you for joining us today. We'll take a few questions now. And for those interested, Paul Kemp has brought examples of safe storage devices and will demonstrate their ease of use and answer any questions you might have regarding locking devices.
Henry, you said it shouldn't be a partisan issue, but if memory serves, the bill died in the 2019 session because the Democrats used it to woo the boycotting Republican senators back. Can you speak to that?
So, I never saw polling work on Senate Bill 978, which is the bill you're referring to, of which safe storage was one of several components. But I do know from the polling work that had been done in May of 2018 on IP 44, which was a very similar piece of legislation, that there were more Republicans supported the legislation than were against it. It wasn't as strong as independent support or as Democratic support, but it definitely was more Republicans supported the legislation than were against it. And I believe that if we were to do that same polling today, that shift would have meant that it would have even greater support within the Republican voters.
But do you question then why the Democrats sacrificed the gun safety bills to get the Republicans back?
I am relatively new to Salem and to politics, and I'm just keeping my eyes looking forward. The people who are behind me, I think, together with State of Safety Action, have the horsepower to move this through and make this law in 2020.
Okay, if anybody else would like to address that, any feeling of betrayal, whether, that dampens optimism that this would pass in the 2020 session?
I'll just say briefly, as Henry said, the safe storage piece of that bill was one small piece. There were other pieces that probably were more alarming to some people. We don't know because we weren't part of the negotiations. We're very, very sad that that bill failed to make it past the Senate floor and over to the House. I believe it would have passed with all of its components, but I do think that the safe storage, according to polling, is one of the things that most galvanizes people across the party spectrum. I think people see it as somewhat like seatbelts. If we know from research that this saves lives, why aren't we doing it?
So, on a similar note, 978 was an omnibus bill that had a lot of different parts to it. Going forward, do you only want this measure considered on its own?
Yes. Yes. For a short session, as you know, it's a very short period of time with which you pass a policy bill out of its first policy committee and get it over across the first chamber floor, over to the second policy committee, across the second chamber floor, all in 5 weeks. And so this is a very targeted effort to get one of the most common sense pieces. There's a lot of different common sense pieces of gun legislation, gun safety legislation. This is one of the most obvious. It has incredibly strong support from a very wide group of stakeholders, with Henry's lead and with Gun Owners for Responsible Gun Ownership and many other groups that are a part of this coalition. So we are very confident that by targeting this one particular piece of legislation, we can certainly pass it. And absolutely the fact that there is a very strong initiative petition out there that we're very confident will be on the ballot, that is added incentive, I think, for legislators to make sure we get this done in the session.
This has happened before, this kind of strategy of having an IP ready to go before a short session. I think minimum wage a couple years ago is when it also occurred. When did this strategy kind of come about? Well, if you could say your name.
My name is Jake Weigler, and I can be identified as a spokesperson for State of Safety Action. After the 2019 session, we evaluated what were the options available. As folks may recall, we actually were hoping to qualify this in the 2018 election, but due to some legal delays initiated by the NRA, we're unable to qualify it for the ballot. So we always envisioned a potential that this would be taken directly to voters. And the polling consistently shows that the voters, over 65% of voters, support this legislation. In this case, we think that this is helpful to induce action or to help clarify the conversation in the legislature. Obviously, there's a lot of time and resources that go into passing a ballot measure, and it's the hope that our elected leaders will lead on this issue and reflect the will of the public. But if that doesn't happen, then we wanted to use this as a contingency.
And I don't recall who said it, but I believe someone said that the speaker was already on board with getting this through. Have you gotten assurances from the Senate president similarly?
Speaker Kotek has spoken a couple times publicly. I think City Club of Portland, she made some remarks in July about this being the top priority on gun legislation in the House. The Senate, we continue to have conversations with them. We know that they have been strong supporters of gun legislation in the past. But as you can imagine, there are a lot of different conversations right now happening about what will happen there in the short session. And we remain optimistic that this will be part of the conversation.
You mentioned our issues.
I would just add that based upon internal whip counts, we believe that Senate Bill 275, which was the equivalent of House Bill 2505, had the votes to pass in the Senate if it had, in fact, been given a floor vote.
You
And just
mentioned
one other
issues.
comment on, in terms, at the end of the session, House Bill 2505 had 29 sponsors on the bill, with additional legislators who had committed to voting in favor of the legislation if it were given a floor vote.
Issues with that.
Go ahead.
This is my third try, so it's got to succeed. Issues with the NRA, you said before?
That's right. They filed.
Could you go to the...
If you insist.
Thank you.
So just to walk through history, these sponsoring signatures were submitted in spring of 2018. It went through a ballot title process with the Oregon Department of Justice, and then there was an appeal that was taken to the Oregon Supreme Court that was led by the NRA as well as a number of other gun industry lobbyist organizations.
It was just a timing issue.
Yes, I mean, I think if you recall, the Supreme Court actually didn't abbreviated their review process in 2018 because they found those arguments were so without merit. But that left us in a position of trying to gather 100,000 signatures in 2 weeks. Although we considered taking that effort, we decided ultimately that it was not going to be successful.
I understand the passion, I understand the rationale, but nobody has gone through and explained what the measure would actually do. So if somebody could please do that. I know it's in your press release, but I'd like to get that on camera.
So at the highest altitude, the legislation basically says that gun owners should be responsible for who has access to their guns, and that if a gun is lost or stolen, it should be reported immediately to law enforcement so that law enforcement has a better chance of recovering the weapon or finding the person who stole the weapon.
Could you be much more specific? I read through the bill.
I will now. The legislation also says that if you do not follow the practice of either securing your gun according to the legislation, or if you fail to report the loss or missing firearm in a timely fashion, that you will be responsible for injuries that occur using that weapon over the next 4 years, and that is strict liability. So if you, for example, are a parent who has left a handgun unsecured and your 15-year-old child has taken that gun to school and there's no damage, but it's discovered that the child has a weapon, there will be a fine in the form of a violation. So in this bill, there are no criminal penalties at all. It's strictly civil penalties in the form of fines. If, on the other hand, the child takes the gun and goes to school and shoots up the windows of a school bus, the owner of that firearm will be held directly responsible for the cost, the expense of the damages done by that child who took that weapon from home that was unsecured.
What I'm trying to get at is, what are you requiring as far as secured? Can someone who owns a gun for self-protection leave it on a nightstand at night without putting it in a biometric drawer or safe? Can someone have it in the glove box while driving? Is that considered unsecured?
So security is, whether the gun is secured or not, is whether or not you control access. So in the case of a gun in your glove box, you control the access to that weapon. If you park the car and leave the gun in the glove box and it is not secured with a trigger lock or a cable lock, or it's not in a car gun safe, it would be considered not secured.
What about the nightstand example I gave? Because a lot of people feel like they need guns, rightly or wrongly, right there for protection. And if you're asleep, are you in control of the weapon?
So, Jake, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So under the first provision of the law, it deals with, as Henry referenced, the idea of control and whether the gun is under your personal control. When a gun is no longer under your personal control, it must be safely stored so that people can't gain unintended access. In the case of the nightstand, we would suggest, yes, that needs to be locked up with either a trigger lock or in a gun safe or a gun vault. There are a number of biometric safety features, such as using a fingerprint or a simple code that allow a very quick access that should not impinge on the ability of a gun owner to defend themselves in the case of a home entry.
So this would require that?
If it's no longer under the individual's control, then yes, the gun needs to be locked up.
The one last question I would have in this regard, because opponents of this would say it takes several seconds for one of those to unlock, for a drawer to slide open, or things like that.
I'm sorry, is there a question there?
Let me take this.
Yeah. Yes.
So how do you respond to them in that regard?
What we would say is that weapon is far more likely to be used to injure a family member themselves than to be used in a home entry situation, and that safe storage allows them to access it in mere seconds, and that 2 or 3 second differential between having to unlock a safety device is well worth the risk, making sure that people don't gain unintended access.
I actually met somebody who came up to me and said that they had left an unsecured weapon on their nightstand. This was about 30 years ago, and a home intruder came into their house, and before they were awake, the home intruder had found the gun and was pistol whipping this person. So his point was that the unsecured weapon on the nightstand was not helpful, it actually was detrimental. And I'd also suggest that people who are half asleep should wake up before they start aiming guns, because the reality is, the statistics say, that you're more likely to shoot your grandson who got kicked out of the house, who's sneaking into your house to spend the night, or your wife who you thought was asleep and is in fact coming back from the bathroom, or any one of a number of horrible other examples.
Yeah, could you kind of clarify a little bit more what safe storage means? I mean, the Reynolds High School shooter, Jared Padgett, he accessed his father and brother's weapons, which were supposedly locked in a closet. How can you further kind of delve into what safe storage means exactly?
So if you have your weapons that are secured in a gun safe where the information on what the access code is on the gun safe, that is unsecured. That is not secured. Unsecured means you're preventing unauthorized people from gaining access.
If anybody's interested, I've got a flash drive with about 6 or 7 different examples of. I've got a flash drive with examples of biometric safes, keyed safes, and then various types of trigger locks, cable locks. I even have a video showing how hard it is to cut a cable lock. So, these things I think will clear up the picture. You're welcome to them. I can also bring some material to demonstrate how these things work, but it's pretty straightforward and it's pretty simple. There are some very effective methods. These things are designed to fit in a nightstand drawer and be quickly accessible. You open the case, it has a light in it, so you can see what's inside the case. I mean, these are designed for quick access, but secured at the same time.
Let's do one last question, and then people who are interested can watch Paul demonstrate. Any other last questions?
So what happens now with the process? You're turning in the, I forget what they're called at this point, the
Qualified.
The qualified signatures.
The sponsorship
So you can start the
signatures.
process. So then do you plan on going out and soliciting signatures, seeing what the legislature does? I mean, can you walk us through what goes through and happens now?
Certainly. So today we will submit 2,000 sponsorship signatures to the Secretary of State's office, the election division. Only 1,000 are required. They will go through and validate the signatures. Once they have validated that there are 1,000 valid Oregon registered voter signatures, they will start the process with contacting the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General will start the process of writing a ballot title. That process has a series of specified days by which they have to accomplish that, and then there are periods of times that are set for public response, commentary back, more public response, challenges. Ultimately, if there are opponents to the ballot title who feel that it doesn't properly reflect what the measure does, it'll go to the Oregon Supreme Court, and they will make a decision whether or not the ballot title is accurate or not. That process could take from now until the end of the year, and we are not allowed to gather any more signatures until we have been granted a ballot title that has gone through that process. So after the first of the year, we're going to be in a position to hopefully have some better clarity on what's happening specifically in the Senate. We'll also have been doing work in the interim, working to gain bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. And at that point, we'll be able to make a determination whether or not we should initiate a signature gathering effort or not. Go ahead.
Thank you, Henry. I just wanted to say that one of the things that hasn't been discussed here is when you look at a safety issue, you look at a loss of lives, and you look at the whole picture, it's about creating that environment for positive change, right? You look at the statistics, you look at how you can make that change. And I just want to take us back to an example that sticks with me that Paul Kemp shared at one point. When we were looking at accidents and we were looking at folks who weren't wearing seatbelts, and we looked at ways at how we could save lives. We enabled and had that law so that people wear seatbelts. Now we get in a car and we don't even think about clicking it, right? We just get in and we put it. That's the environment that we are hopeful for. We're hopeful that it just becomes a way of life for folks and responsible gun owners. Because we're not about penalizing and looking for ways to hurt people. We're about looking at ways that we can create positive change in that behavior. So I think that's really what we need to also think about, and I'm really proud to be part of this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We're going to be taking these signatures over to the Secretary of State's office to drop them off now. If anyone wants to tag along, they're more than welcome. But I appreciate you guys making the time today. Thank you.
Thank you all very
Thank you all.
much.